started. All right, everyone, please. As I was mentioning to you the last 2 or 3 times that I came here, that 14th April is a special day. We have managed to invite someone from the industry who is a expert in this particular domain that we are talking about, which is business process modeling. And that is my good friend Norbert Raymond. Norbert has 25 years of experience as a business analyst, and I told you that BPM is the bread and butter for business analysts. Most of his work has been in financial services, and he has done operating model design, requirements management, process modeling, process maps, quality, various very valuable portfolios. And he has been a business analysis practice leader in Bankers Trust, Westpac, and most recently in AMP Bank. And Norbert has given me the freedom to make up the rest, but I think that's pretty impressive. Also, he knows that I can't pay him, but on behalf of all of you, I'm going to take him out for dinner just to thank you for sparing his valuable time and coming here and sharing with you how BPM is done in practice. And you can see all these charts around. And yes, you can ask questions, and this should be a fairly interactive session. So please join me in welcoming Norbert Raymond. Over to you.
Okay. So guys, you want to... So you can actually see some of these. This was intended not to be a PowerPoint presentation. Just trying to print all
You're okay to do it, or do you want me to take over?
I can do.
On
Okay.
paper.
If you get tired, let me know.
Maybe do a few things on the PowerPoint. So before I start, can you guys tell me what this is business process modeling?
Business process modeling.
What do you think business process modeling is?
Yes,
What do you think?
that's a good start.
And there's no right or wrong, right?
Yeah, I think he's try to organize the work that you have to do, to have like this common channel of communication between all the teams, so everyone knows where should they start to work and how all the project is going, and when they have to like jump and do what they have to do.
Anybody else?
Putting all the business processes, in simple words, putting all the business processes in diagrams so that everyone will understand, like the managers, IT persons, everyone, because diagrams are kind of easy to understand. So.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a bit of diagramming, there's a bit of planning in there. Anything else, guys? Somebody from this one.
The boys, come on, the boys. Both the girls have answered now.
All right. Okay, we won't push you, but I will ask you questions later. All right. So basically, my definition of business process modeling is really it's a set of techniques that basically allows you to understand a particular problem. So it allows you to analyse what's currently happening in the business, and also it has other elements of it that allows you to design what the future state of the business is going to be, right? And it's really used in conjunction with many other techniques, right? So therefore, I can use business process modelling with something that Bhuvan is quite sort of happy to use, and he used it in our recent collaboration, which is around transition modelling, state transition modelling. But you can also use business process modelling with Agile, and I believe one of the topics that we're going to talk about today is about how does business process modelling held in an Agile delivery and some of the pitfalls. Right, so it's really about, it's a bunch of techniques that allows you to understand current state of the business and allows you to design the future state, and it's used for communication purposes, so everybody understands where you're at with the particular change that you're talking about. Okay. And so basically what I'd like to walk you through is, this is stuff that's happening right now. So these sort of process models that you see there were actually, all the writing on them happened on Saturday. So these are things that are happening now, and these will be updated this week and will be further detailed this week. So you're going to see something that's actually happening as we speak. Okay, so basically, just to describe the challenge that we're facing at the moment is in AMP Bank. So I work for AMP, and in AMP Bank, we're in the process of re-engineering the mortgage origination business. Right? And the beginning of any good business process modelling exercise starts with what is it that you want to try to achieve. Right? So we start with, what is our vision from re-engineering this particular process? And in this case, how many of you know about mortgages and the steps of mortgages? Okay. So
who is doing banking? Who is doing banking? Have you forgotten the project you are doing?
So I'll just describe quickly to you, the sort of key steps. So basically, if I want to go and look at buying a home and I want to get a mortgage, I generally go to a mortgage broker, right? And we have a chat, and then they decide, yes, okay, we should submit an application to AMP or Westpac or whatever it is. So therefore, that's called sort of pre-origination, right? Where there's this whole conversation that says what are you trying to do, what type of mortgage, how much can you repay, and all that sort of stuff. Then the next piece is around once we're happy, once the broker and the customer is happy with that, they then submit an application. So that's the lodgement part. So therefore, you've got a pre-origination, a pre-lodgement, lodgement. Then it goes to the bank, right, where they actually verify the mortgage and make sure that all the documents are there, your pay slip, valuations, etc., etc. And then the next thing that happens is that the credit managers then actually look at the application and see whether it's credit worthy. Right? So they assess it from a credit perspective to say, oh, okay, fine, you can or can't borrow money. Right? Then once that's been assessed, you then get an approval, and then it goes through to settlement, which is where the bank will give you the money so you can pay for the house, etc. And then there's after that, it's when you have to pay back the loan, right? It's called servicing, so that's right at the end. So therefore, what the objective of this particular project is to reduce the time that it takes from a mortgage to go from I'm submitting it to I'm formally approving it after the credit assessment. Right? So, and what we're trying to do here is we're taking it in two steps. When you do a mortgage, basically what happens is you can either get a pre-approval if you don't have a home already picked, so therefore you might go to the bank and say, look, I'm thinking of buying a house, can I have a loan? And they'll say, yep, you can have a loan for 300,000, 400,000, whatever it is, without you actually having a house. So that's a pre-approved. Right? And then when you get a house, then they'll go through the full approval process. It can be conditionally approved, which means that they might say, look, we'll approve it, but you've got to meet these certain conditions, right? Or you've got to get a valuation, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to get mortgage insurance, etc. And then after sort of conditional approval, then there's formal approval. Currently, it's taking us a significant amount of time to do that. And what we're trying to do is reduce that time from the time that somebody lodges an application to the time that they submit it to 3 days. And then to formal approval, 5 days, right? So we're trying to significantly improve that process.
So that is the first key learning experience for all of us, that when we are asked to do a BPM exercise, we look at what's the business objective. Right? There are 2 things which most of you have done successfully. Can you tell me what were the 2 first things that we decided we will do in BPM exercise? loudly, please.
Identify
Identify
the stakeholders.
the stakeholders. Who are your key stakeholders? And most reports have got that. Most draft reports have got that. And then we start breaking it down, isn't it? So the business outcome that Norbert is talking about is derived from the key stakeholders. And he's continuously dealing with managing, improving, helping all the stakeholders.
Yeah. So therefore, so you know how previously you mentioned us about, you know, coming up with maps and all that sort of stuff. But without knowing that, you can do anything you want over here, right? So therefore, the whole idea is to understand what are we trying to move to and where are we going from, right? So you understand how you're going to make changes from a current situation to a target situation. Yeah. And so that's the vision. So we're aiming to get there, but that breaks down into a number of metrics, KPIs around, you know, lodgement rate, around cycle time, around one of the key things to get things to move quickly is, you know how we talked about credit decisioning, so the credit officers or managers assessing your application. One of the things that makes things go quickly is for that to be automated as much as possible. So what we're trying to do there is automate credit decisioning or improve the rate at which we do credit decisioning. Today, it can be very manual. Okay. And then there's basically reducing, you know, the handoff between, you know, people within the organisation, so operations, credit, back to operations, etc. And then also the other thing is about how do you quickly train up people so they become proficient in executing the mortgage process. Right? So therefore, those are some of the key targets that we're looking at. That says, you know, the vision is 5 to 7 days, but to actually achieve that, if you can achieve those bottom ones, then you should be able to achieve that 5 to 7 days. Right? And we use that to guide everything that we do in relations to the process, in relations to the system improvement that we're going to make, in relations to the people improvement that we're going to make.
One of the things we had done here is once we have identified the stakeholders and we understand what they want, we break down the overall BPM exercise into subsystems or packages.
Yep.
And again,
yep.
most students said,
so that's the next piece that we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Is so therefore, once you understand what you're trying to do, in the case of in this one, mortgages, we then basically look at, okay, what are all the processes that are involved in supporting the mortgage business? And we look at it from 3 dimensions. We look at it from basically a core dimension, which is really the processes that will deliver value to the customers themselves. So if you're looking at mortgages, the process that's actually going to deliver you the loan in the end. If you're looking at, say, for instance, credit cards, the one that gives you the credit card. So there's the core, the primary process, right? The one that adds value to the end customer. Then we look at management processes, which means, okay, what are those processes that are actually going to be monitoring those KPIs then, those targets, to make sure that things are operating the way they should be operating. So you may have heard the term of management reporting and those sorts of things. So therefore, there's a bunch of processes that says, I need to gather data as to the way the process is running so I can make decisions about future improvement of the process, or to, on a day-to-day basis in operation, to be able to move processing work around to achieve those outcomes. And then finally, there's the supporting processes. So basically, to run the mortgage process, there's things about, you know, for instance, recently, I think it was as recent as 2 months ago, the governor of the Reserve Bank decided that they were going to bring the mortgage rate down, the interest rate down by 0.5%. Right? So therefore, that means that there's a supporting process that has to happen where we go and maintain that rate to say, oh, by the way, the rate used to be whatever it was, and now it is this. Or when we create a new product, we might have to go in there to create, okay, this product has these features, etc. Right? So there's some supporting and accounting or reconciliation processes. So therefore, that gives us a holistic view of all the different processes that we need to address. Right? One of the common pitfalls that I have fallen into and that many other of my colleagues have fallen into is we tend to only focus on the main process, and we forget about everything else. Or we don't forget about it, we just sort of push it aside. So therefore what happens is the scope of our change is not as big as what it should be. And we tend to forget about those sorts of things until we're ready to deliver it into the business. Right? And so therefore then they're like, oh, okay, how do I do this? And, bummer. You know, how do we do that? Oh, okay, fine. Then we start running around to try to work out. So therefore, from a business process modelling perspective, the first thing you should do is identify all those processes that will require change. Right? Some of them may require little change, some of them may not require any change at all, but at least you've identified them. And that's what we did with, this is not, this one is not credit cards. Sorry, this one is not mortgages, this one's credit cards, which was the other project that I was on just prior to this one. Where what we did here was, we actually started with, okay, I'll just draw something.
Sure.
So we basically started with, so therefore what I'm trying to tell you is business process modelling is not just about producing process. So what we started with was to basically say, if this is the organisation, so to get to that thing over there, we said, who are our stakeholders? So you've got your customer. In the case of credit cards, you've got the customer, you've got brokers, you've got, you know, the employees that actually process the card, you've got various third-party providers that provide credit checks, that may provide settlement processes, etc. And they all have events that come in. Right? And there's always an event that comes in, and there's always a value that goes in. In the case of the customer, the event will be, I want a loan, and the value that's coming back out is, I've got the money. And so therefore what we do is we do an event analysis and a stakeholder analysis to identify, because each one of those events must have a process that's going to convert that event into value. And so therefore we identify all those processes, and that's how we come up with this thing, which is really a value chain or a process architecture that tells you out of, you know, in this case, a credit card business, right, there were 50 odd processes that needed to be looked at, of which then we only took a few of them, where we said, okay, fine, we need to look at those main ones, because that's where the change is going to be. Okay, but it's a good idea to understand that. And then that's also a good thing to go to your stakeholders with, to say, okay, fine, at a high level, we believe this is the scope of the change that we want to do.
So in this context, if you can describe a bit more on what we consider as value stream. By the way, I'm asking questions on your behalf. I want you to raise your hand, stop Norbert, and ask him questions while he's speaking. But this particular one, so you mentioned about events and value. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about a value chain or a value stream, how does that fit in with, say, this particular example of credit?
So when you say value stream or value chain, what are you actually doing?
I'm talking about okay, can someone have you done the seminar on value? Or is it this week? Okay, too early. So So you talked about 50 odd processes for credit. You talked about many other processes for mortgage origination.
Yep.
Uh, we are looking at a collection of processes that would provide overall value to our customer.
Yep.
So, for example, I'm a banking customer, and the bank has got customer withdraws cash, highly efficient use case. But when it comes to deposit, it's pretty bad. So the value that the customer derives from the bank overall is bad. I'm a passenger in an airline. My flight is excellent on time, but the airline loses my bags, right? So the stream decides the value, and the stream is made up of a chain of events, which includes, of course, booking and checking in and flying, but which also includes dropping the bags and receiving the bag. So your event and value makes perfect sense, but is it I mean, when we do analysis, it's one event and the value that's coming out of that event. But we want to look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
And how do we do that in practice with all these 50 processes? Do you look at them together, or you look at them, what do you do?
Yep, all right. So basically, so once you've identified, this is where we're going to come up next time. So basically, once you've identified, so if you look at it, this is pretty much the value chain for credit cards, which basically says, and I'll draw it slightly differently. You may have heard of Michael Porter.
Michael Porter, management,
the strategy guy. Yeah. So basically, he came up with the concept of the value chain, which basically talks about core, management, and support. So basically, those three components that we talked about previously. And basically, what the concept of value chain is, that there are many processes that need to be at play, that interact with each other to deliver value both to the customer and to the organisation. Right? So therefore, when you're looking at a piece of process improvement, what you're tending to do is you're looking at primarily the core value chain, right? And then you're looking at, from within that, where are there deficiencies, and therefore where should I be addressing the effort, and where should I be putting in sort of the investment. Okay, so, and then you can get into this real debate about, how do you do this quickly? How do you get to the root cause quickly? And there's this whole debate about, the Six Sigma guys will tell you that you need lots of data. You need to go and do sampling, and then you've got to run statistics on it, and all that sort of stuff. That's one camp. Then you've got the agile camp that says, basically, hey, we want to do this quickly. We don't want to waste, 6 months trying to get data and all that sort of stuff. So therefore, they take a slightly different, more subjective approach to it. Right? And so in the case of credit cards and mortgage origination, we did a bit of a blend. Like most things in practice, there tend to be a bit of a blend of, data gathering, a bit of subjective analysis, or a bit of agile, a bit of this, a bit of that. I think he's written a book on composite stuff.
Agile, yes.
Know about composites?
No, because we haven't discussed agile.
Okay.
In this.
So basically, then it comes down to, once we've understood this, then we start looking at, where should we be focusing our effort? Right? And so this is where the business outcomes come into it. So we've got the target that we want. Then we've understood, okay, these are all the processes. But then we start talking about, actually, what is it that we need to do to achieve that? And so in this case here, in the case of mortgage origination, we talked about that we had 5 outcomes that we needed to get to over that period of time, because the benefits, the value, would be associated with those. So we needed to be able to get originate a mortgage. So from the time that the customer and the broker types the thing to unconditional approval, right, was one outcome. We needed to be able to originate that in relation to new mortgages. We needed to be able to enhance for new loans and increases, right, enhance the lodgement capability, etc., etc. Right?
But okay.
Also, sorry,
Yeah, you go first.
the experience or previous experience or knowledge that you have about the mortgages can give you also, I mean, you don't need data for 6 months.
Yeah.
If you have like previous experience,
That's right.
you can like.
So we
sort of-
actually, you're absolutely right. So we actually use, you remember how Bhuvan talked about your stakeholders?
Yeah.
We actually use the stakeholders
Yeah.
to actually tell us, because they've got the experience. They know the business. They know where the challenges are. We as analysts, we're there to create an environment for them to be able to come up with where they believe the value is going to be and where they believe the solution should be.
Yeah, I
Because
think
they've got the ideas, right?
In this case, probably they like delete some processes,
Yeah.
as you said, like
Mm.
something goes
So-
to operation, then
That's right.
comes back to the other thing, then comes.
So they basically know that. We as analysts, sometimes we have to verify that. So they'll tell us, look, I think you need to focus here, here, and here, right? Then we've got to say, okay, fine, if that's what we think, and they think, well, they'll come up with a hypothesis that says if you do blah, 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 this will happen. Then we've got to go and prove it. So this is where instead of gathering data across the entire chain, you're just saying, okay, fine, you've told me this is the highest priority based on your experience. So we're going to prove, or actually not prove, we're really looking for data to support that idea, right? And in most of the time, they're probably right. In some instances, they might not be, but most of the time they're right.
Their experience,
Yeah.
as you mentioned.
So you've got to take a bit of both. So the experience, and then you get the data to support it, generally speaking. Because otherwise you'll be there getting the data for a long time. Right. So
one question.
Yeah.
In the Michael Porter literature, there is this dollar appearing, but in the discussion that you guys are going to go through this week, I have mentioned something more than a dollar, because value may not be always quantifiable.
That's right.
So could you please throw some comments or some
So
insights?
as part of the mortgage origination process, we're looking at efficiency, which will translate into dollars, but we're also looking at customer experience. So you think about yourself when you're going to get a mortgage, or a loan, any loan, doesn't matter, for a car or whatever, and it's taking forever to get that loan. So therefore it's a poor experience. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to not only make it efficient from a processing perspective, but we're also trying to ensure that the customer has a great experience. So one, they stay with the organisation, and secondly, they go and recommend other people to the organisation. So we're looking at not only customer experience, and then there's employee experience, right? Because you've got to look at the people inside the organisation. Because one of the things we talk about, and we've sort of embarked on at AMP, is we've blended all this good analysis stuff with what we call human-centred design, which basically says we need to look at the human aspect of it to make sure that the customer's getting what they really need, and also the employees have the facilities to deliver a great experience to that customer. Because in a lot of instances, what we do is we make the front end look really good, and then at the back, right, we've got people running around all over the place, and it's really frustrating. So it's really about looking at not only the business shareholders, they care about it mostly, right? So if I'm investing in AMP, I want money. But the customer, they're more about a whole of life experience, so they're looking at that. And the employees, it's about, okay, how do I do the best that I can in service of that customer? So that's what we're trying to do when we look at this holistically. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So any question, guys, before we move on from process architecture to the next one?
Any thoughts? How does
Any
this
thoughts, any comments?
relate to your project? So you, I mean, with Norbert's experience, and I'm here as well, we can answer your questions related to your project. Yes.
Regarding to credit card process, is there a security system in that process also?
When you say security system,
Like applying for credit card, sharing the information, and like transaction in credit card. So how the security has been managed in that process?
so basically security we would consider as one of those
Supporting processes.
right? So therefore, anything to do with financial stuff needs to have complied with a certain level of security. In the case of credit cards, there's actually there's actually security protocols, right, that have been put out by the various regulators that says you must comply with this particular protocol, right, for communicating or transmitting credit card information. So therefore, we would deal with security stuff, right, as part of not necessarily the process modelling, but as part of looking at what do we need to enable this process to run to achieve those outcomes, but also comply with those legislative requirements that we need to comply. And so security then would fall under a supporting piece. It would also end up as, you may have heard the term non-functional requirements. Because I can deliver the process, I can deliver your credit card without any security around it. We'll still get a credit card, but it might be fraught with damage. Okay, so we'll talk about that as to how do you specify the need for support. So any other?
I would like to cover a little bit the aspect of creating internal value. I mean, we've talked about creating value to customers and value to our employees. From your experience, have you, or how have you generally dealt with creating internal value? Because, for example, what I've perceived from my own experience and or other colleagues of mine, sometimes lots of people get stuck with tedious administrative processes, right, from day to day. They might waste even 50% of their time on just those little things that are very, very annoying to everyone from what I've observed. So I don't have a particular specific question, but how have you dealt, or would you be able to mention a specific case where you guys had a tremendous problem with internal efficiency?
So you're talking about non-customer facing processes,
Right, yeah.
which are so internal optimization of processes. So
I think in this case, automatization can be one answer. Like if they put automatic process for sort of things, they are eliminating this exhausting work that some employees have to do. For example, validation of whatever. Maybe it's really annoying. If you put like an automatic process for do that, it's just like taking homework, annoying homework for those employees. And maybe they do like this authentication would go more in a higher level when they pass like all these garbage work.
Even with this particular project, we're looking at not only the core piece, but we're looking at this piece obviously because that's what's going to drive that. But we're also looking at the supporting pieces, like for instance, how do we with all processes, you must have process controls. That's which means that, see, for every process, there's potential failure points everywhere. Right? Things can go wrong everywhere. Like, for instance, one of the with the mortgage origination piece, we talk about loans for AMP staff members. And we basically say actually, no, I won't talk about that one. Brokers. Brokers can sell mortgages if they're accredited to sell that particular product. Right? With all financial products, we need to be accredited to be able to sell that to somebody. So therefore, one of the controls is, how do you ensure that a broker is accredited to sell a particular product? Right? And so therefore, as part of the supporting function, you need to be able to manage those controls and manage those rules. So that can be done manually, like, for instance, you can have spreadsheets, and then spreadsheets are given to your IT guys, and the IT guys then load it up, etc. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, it could be, the user's in control, and they can, automatically articulate the business rules that basically says, a broker must be accredited to sell it. Right? So therefore, as part of this particular process or initiative, we're also looking at some of those administrative functions that, although they don't deliver to that ultimate vision, but they reduce the cost of the operation. And not only that, is they increase the employee satisfaction and the employee experience. Right? So we're always looking at those things. And generally speaking, when you're running on big projects, right, you tend to primarily be focusing on this. But we do have, continuous improvement teams that basically look at, how do I improve my day-to-day team outcome? And they come up with small changes to the process. But on a project, like, for instance, this project, we're talking multi-million-dollar change. So therefore, our focus is primarily on getting that outcome. But at the same time, we're looking at, okay, how do we make it as efficient as possible for the supporting side? Sometimes, because projects, we do have constraints of time and budget, and therefore sometimes things get de-scoped, which causes a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. So, any other questions? Do you have a question? So once we basically have the process architectures, like in the case of mortgage origination, as I mentioned, we talked about, having lodgement, we talked about verification, we talked about assessment, we talked about document preparation. So these we call process areas or capability areas. So then what we tend to do is we start then looking at capability models. So to be able to lodge an application, we need a bunch of people, a bunch of processes, and a bunch of technology. Right? That put together is a capability to be able, for us, to be able to say, customer, you can lodge an application to us. Right? So therefore, what we do is we break that into the various capabilities. So over here, if you look at this one, for credit cards, it's got all the different capabilities that we need to be able to achieve whatever the outcome was. And what we do is we actually use the process model to drive that. Right? So therefore, we look at the process and say, for me to be able to lodge an application, what capability do I need? What do I need from a system perspective? What do I need from a people perspective? What do I need from a policy perspective, from a facility perspective? So all these things we call enablers to the process, because they're the ones that make the process happen. Right? So we tend to look at the capabilities, And then we use those capabilities to determine our prioritisation. So you talked about getting people together and saying, where should we be changing? Once we've gotten those chunks of capability, then we can say to people, where do you think we will get the highest value? So therefore they can go and say, oh look, you know, I think you need to focus here, and you need to focus here, and you need to focus there. Right? And then we drill down further and further. Right? So, but basically, so what this model is intended to show you is the entire capability set that we will deliver over 3 different periods. You'll see that the colours, so here the aim was to turn as much as possible green, no, as much as possible blue, right? Blue was basically, in this case, was about automated by AMP. And in some instances it was manual. Green, it was provided by an external party, and what we wanted to do was make sure that we had an AMP experience. So therefore, over time, what we said was, okay, across the process, we needed to turn on these different bits of capability over periods of time. So therefore, as you can see, you've got 2C here and 2D. Right? So 2C is what we'll be delivering, I think, in the next month or so. And 2D is what we're going to be delivering in August. So therefore, over time, what we're talking about, what bits of the process we're either going to remove inefficiencies on, or we're going to automate, or we're going to add this, or we're going to add that. Okay. So let me go to the next one, which I think so that's the process maps that you can see there. So basically, so where we start, so this is the first time where we're doing actually a process model. Right, so we've understood the capability, we'll do the process model, and then the next thing we do is basically we look at, I don't know whether you can see this, but that is a storyboard. So this is where we start blending agile with process modeling. So we've gone and said, for each of the capability that we need, across the life cycle, you can't actually see this properly, but this says lodgement, this says verification, this says assessment, etc. We then say, what are the functions that we need to actually enable that particular thing? So in the case of lodgement, we need an ability to capture personal details of the customer. We need an ability to capture security, etc., etc. So therefore, we have all those listed down, and then we go and say, okay, what do we need to do about those things? And so this is where you start getting the concept of user stories and story maps, etc. So how many of you have done Agile? Or
anyone exposed to writing user stories? You've done that?
I work in Agile team.
Right.
We used to have a daily stand-up meetings.
okay, yeah, cool. So basically, so what we did was we basically took the process map, right, and we then said, okay, fine, for lodgement, which is here, what are the things that we need? So you can see green means. Sorry?
Third party? Well, if you...
No, yeah. So basically the green bit, so the green bit means system A. The white bit means it's manual, the blue bit means system B, the orangey bit there means system C. Right, so what we do is we go through each one of those and we say, okay, for this thing here, what is it that we need to do? Right, and we basically list down all the things. And remember, we're always very cognizant of that thing. So whatever we're listing down, we always ask, why are we doing it? So therefore, in the case of a user story, we talk about, in order to be able to do something, to achieve something, we want to be able to do ABC. Right? So therefore, we're always thinking about what value do we need to deliver, and then how we deliver. Right? So therefore, what we're building up is a series of user stories, right? And this being agile, so everything, as you can see here, is all visual and all that sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean we don't write anything about it. Right? So basically, we have all the user stories that will deliver the end outcome that we want to achieve those goals. Right? So we go through, and then we end up prioritising them based upon, you know, how much they contribute to this. So therefore, we will then get a list of prioritised stories for the delivery. And as part of that, we will also look at security. So in the case of lodgement, because they're providing financial information, how do we ensure that there's security bias? So we therefore then will start looking at, you know, what sort of performance do we need, what sort of security do we need, etc. And this is where the architects tend to get involved.
What happens if the process takes longer than expected?
Then, so basically, if it does take longer than expected, usually what happens is you say, okay, if we achieve this, we will basically get a benefit of Y, and that will amount to a value of X. If the process takes longer, less benefit, less value. So therefore, what that usually means is you've spent your money and you're not going to get as much in return, right? Then you can do a number of things. You can keep investing in it, right? Or you can say, well, that's good enough. But what we're doing as we go through the analysis is we're always looking at, we might start off with 5 to 7 days as our goal. But then as we find what we can cover, because sometimes you're limited by technology, sometimes you're limited by time, you might say, look, you know, we might need to compromise this, and therefore we're not going to achieve that, and therefore it's going to take that. So the conversation that I was having with the program manager just before was exactly around that, which was around, okay, we're delivering something for 2C, which bits are we not going to deliver, and what's the impact on the benefit? So that was the conversation before. So we were talking exactly that.
And in week 9, we are going to discuss a little bit about process metrics. So I guess the question you are asking and what Norbert is mentioning is some sort of a measure of how that process will perform. There are other measures as well, like the size of a process. How big is a process? We see here this particular diagram from a distance right now, but that doesn't tell us how big or how complex it is. So we can have some sort of a measure there. In here, the vision is 1 to 3 days conditional approval, 5 to 7 days formal approval. So if I start from scratch, in the worst case, in 10 days, I must receive formal approval. And in the best case, 1 to 5, so 6 days. So what you are asking is what happens if it goes to 11th day. And what Norbert is saying is it's going to be a balancing act. So our job as process modelers is to be able to provide or at least be aware of what we